learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome.
Welcome. So, if you're starting your journey into Japan's past, today we're really zeroing in on a pivotal time, the Meiji period.
Right.
We're going to look specifically at how ideas about national identity started to form, and also how the education system got this massive overhaul.
And these are huge foundational changes, aren't they? Understanding them really helps make sense of later Japanese history.
Absolutely. They set the stage for so much that follows.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
The Meiji Restoration, late 19th century, it really set off this period of, well, incredible change.
It really did.
And it sounds like right from the beginning, there were different ideas bubbling up about what it meant to be Japanese in this new era, like the freedom and people's rights movement. What was driving that?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. In those early Meiji years, you had these really influential thinkers, people like Nakachomen, Oiken Taro, and they were strongly pushing for things like national liberty, individual rights. It was inspired by Western liberal thought, you know? And this idea of having more political participation, it really caught on, especially with younger people and the intellectuals. They wanted a Japan where people had a real say.
But at the same time, Japan wasn't existing in a vacuum. There was this growing awareness of Western powers moving into East Asia. How did that external pressure fit in?
Right, exactly. That's the other crucial piece. There was this very real sense of external crisis. People felt threatened.
You can imagine.
And that feeling directly fed into something called the national power theory. Basically, the idea that Japan had to build up its military, its economy, its national unity.
To avoid being colonized or dominated.
Precisely. To survive and stay independent. So you had this internal push for rights, but also this external pressure demanding national strength, sometimes pulling in different directions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about, blindly copying the West.
Yeah.
There was pushback, a desire to hold on to something distinctively Japanese.
Oh, definitely. That's a really important point. It highlights just how complex this whole modernization process was. By the late 1880s, you see the Seikyoshi group pop up.
Seikyoshi.
Yeah, with figures like Miyake Setsure. They started a magazine in 1888 called Nihonjin, which just means the Japanese.
Aptly named.
Right. And they were pretty critical of what they saw as just, well, superficial westernization. They argued strongly for preserving traditional Japanese culture and values, what you could call national preservationism.
So not everyone was rushing to throw out the old ways.
Not at all. There was a significant strand of thought saying, hold on, let's protect our unique identity. But then you also had figures like Tokutomi Soho.
Okay, another perspective.
Yes, he started his magazine, Kokumin no Tomo, The Nation's Friend, a bit earlier, in 1887, and his initial idea was different. He pushed for a kind of westernization that would benefit the common person.
Nah, more bottom up.
Kind of. He criticized government policies that, he felt, adopted Western ways mainly to benefit the elites, the privileged classes.
Interesting. So a more egalitarian vision for modernization.
Initially, yes. But it's important to see how thinking evolved. For Tokutomi Soho, a major shift happened after Japan won the Sino-Japanese War.
Right, 1894-95.
Exactly. After that victory, his focus really pivoted towards the need to strengthen the nation above all else. Nationalism became much more central to his writing.
So it sounds like as the Meiji period went on, this emphasis on national unity, national strength, it sort of won out, became the dominant idea.
That's a fair assessment, yes. Those earlier debates didn't disappear entirely, but the tide definitely turned towards a more consolidated nationalistic feeling in the latter half of Meiji.
Now, this shift in thinking was happening right alongside this huge transformation in education. Why was education seen as so critical by the Meiji government?
Well, they saw national education as absolutely fundamental for Japan's progress. The idea was if you educate the whole population in a certain way,
You create a unified, modern nation.
Exactly. A nation capable of competing with the West. Schooling became the main tool for national development, for building that strength and unity.
And the first attempts at setting up this system, they looked overseas for models.
They did. In the early years, you can see the influence of more liberal ideas from France and the United States in educational policies, a bit more decentralized, perhaps.
But that changed. You mentioned 1886 seemed like a key moment.
A huge turning point. 1886, that's when Mori Aranori, the Minister of Education, brought in a whole series of school system ordinances.
Ordinances. like laws.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
The elementary school order, the middle school order, the imperial university order, these basically mapped out the entire system from top to bottom.
And they really cemented a more nationalistic approach to education.
Absolutely. They laid the groundwork for a much more centralized system geared towards national goals.
And a big part of this was making sure everyone got at least some schooling, right? Compulsory education.
Yes, the elementary school order established compulsory education. Initially, it was for 4 years, within an 8-year elementary program.
Only 4 years.
At first. But then, in 1907, they extended it to 6 years. And the impact was, well, dramatic. Starting in the 1890s, enrollment rates just shot up.
Wow. And was this just for boys? What about girls' education?
That was another really significant development. A key move was abolishing tuition fees for public elementary schools in 1900.
Making it free.
Exactly. And that made a huge difference for girls' enrollment. By the end of the Meiji period, the number of girls in elementary school was almost the same as boys. Getting basic education out to nearly everyone was a major achievement.
But to staff all these new schools, you'd need a massive number of teachers.
You certainly would, and the government tackled that head-on by setting up normal schools, teacher training colleges all across the country.
Okay.
These were crucial for producing the teachers needed to deliver this national curriculum and, frankly, to instill those national values.
Speaking of national values, the Imperial Rescript on Education from 1890 sounds really important here. What was that all about?
It was absolutely central, foundational, really. The Rescript basically laid out the moral and ethical core of Japanese education.
Which was?
Heavy emphasis on loyalty to the emperor and on traditional Confucian-based family morality. These were presented as the bedrock of the nation. You could almost think of it as the ethical operating system for schools.
An ethical operating system. I like that. Embedding loyalty and traditional values deep down.
Pretty much. It shaped the mindset for generations.
And this message wasn't just in the Rescript. It flowed down into the classrooms.
Yes, very directly. From 1903 onwards, the government implemented a national textbook system for elementary schools.
So everyone learning the same thing from the same books.
Exactly. It ensured a standardized curriculum across the entire country, reinforcing that nationalistic educational agenda, creating a shared story, a shared identity.
Okay, let's shift up to higher education. Tokyo University seems like the big one. What was its intended role?
It was central. It actually became the Imperial University in 1886. Later, Tokyo Imperial University. Its mission was explicitly tied to the state's needs.
How so?
Well, Article 1 of the Imperial University Order from 1886 puts it pretty clearly. It was to teach the academic arts and sciences needed by the state and to deeply investigate their principles.
Needed by the state. Very direct.
Very. It was designed from the start to train the leaders, the administrators, the technocrats that modern Japan required.
But it wasn't only state-run universities contributing, right? What about private institutions?
Oh, absolutely not. You had incredibly important private universities emerging, too. Think of Fukuzawa Yukichi's Kyojiku,
right?
Okuma Shigenobu's Tokyo Senmon Gakko, which became Waseda University,
Waseda, another huge name.
and Nijima Jo's Doshisha down in Kyoto. These all had their own distinct philosophies, often more liberal or specialized, and they produced tons of talent for politics, business, journalism, really vital contributions.
And was this period also when higher education started opening up, even a little, for women?
Yes, it was. There was definitely a growing awareness that women's education was important too, though obviously still limited compared to men's.
But institutions were founded.
Key ones, yes, like Tsuda Umeko's Joshi Eigaku Juku, that's now Tsuda University, focusing initially on English studies. And Naruce Jinzo founded Japan Women's University. These were pioneering efforts, really crucial first steps.
So getting a university degree back then must have been a really big deal, a path to the elite.
It absolutely was. University enrollment was growing, but compared to the total population, graduates were still a small elite group before World War II.
And the government kept expanding the system.
Yes, the imperial university system grew to 9 institutions across Japan, and its colonies, by the end of this era, places like Kyoto, Tohoku, Kyushu, Hokkaido, even Kaijo-Seoul, and Taipei.
Wow, 9 imperial universities.
And after the war, these, well, the ones within Japan proper, became the core of the new national university system. Plus those normal schools we mentioned. Some evolved into major education universities like Tokyo Gakugei or Okanamizu.
And other specialized schools.
Right. Other government schools became universities too, like Tokyo University of Foreign Studies or Hitotsubashi University. And of course, the big private ones like Keio and Waseda just continued to grow in stature.
It feels like we should also touch on science and research. This wasn't just about politics and social structures changing, right?
Not at all. This was also a time of huge intellectual ferment. Ideas like Darwin's theory of evolution were coming in, sparking new kinds of scientific thinking.
So universities became research centers too.
Increasingly so. Initially, Japan relied heavily on foreign teachers, Oyatoi Gakukujin, to bring in modern academic disciplines.
Makes sense.
But fairly quickly, Japanese researchers started making their own major contributions. People like Nagaoka Hantaro with his early model of the atom.
Right.
Kitasato Shibasaburo, who isolated the tetanus bacillus. Shiga Kiyoshi discovered the dysentery bacillus. Takamine Yokichi isolated adrenaline and created takadiastase, an enzyme. Real breakthroughs.
So original research was taking off.
Definitely. In the sciences, but also in the humanities, you saw a deepening of empirical, evidence-based research methods taking hold.
So wrapping this up, the Meiji period really saw this intense, intertwined development shaping a modern national identity and building an education system to support and spread that identity.
That's a perfect way to put it. The two were deeply connected, shaping each other. And these developments were absolutely fundamental in charting Japan's course into the 20th century.
And for anyone studying Japanese history, getting a handle on these shifts, the ideas, the institutions is just essential groundwork.
It really is. Which maybe leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay.
This powerful focus on national unity, on a standardized education system, it clearly helped Japan modernize rapidly, build strength. But how might it also have, perhaps, limited certain kinds of diverse thinking or critical perspectives in the longer run?
The potential downsides of that strong unity.
Exactly. Something to consider as you explored Japan's fascinating history further.